Welcome back, everybody, to the episode where we make this beast beautiful. We start out with making our end bands. The top one is known as the headband, easy to remember, and the bottom one is the tailband. And we're going to make our own. You can buy little ones, but the size of this book is such that we're going to need something a bit beefier. So we glue a thin strip onto a slightly wider strip of leather, glue it up good, and then we're going to roll it and use that super useful bookbinding tool, the clip. I pre-measured these so that they'll wrap around the spine the right amount. But it's easy to make them first. You can make a long strip of one, glue it up, let it dry, and then cut it to length. These ones you can see on the top left there are already dyed. And we're going to glue them onto this big beefy book. But first, we'll put some bookmarks on it. Most books only need one bookmark, but for a reference book, it's nice to put a few. Traditionally, they do them multicolored so you can remember your blue section, your red section, your yellow section. But just for the pure aesthetics of this book, I want them all black. As I said, originally I was thinking of this book in a bright red with gold on it. Still waiting for the tools that will allow me to do the gold. But also as I was making it, I wanted to salvage the patina on the edge of these pages, that kind of rough, old wizard's book kind of look. And I want a pirate, a seafaring pirate kind of feel to this. So we're going to go a bit more rustic, starting with these end bands. So I attach some thread to the headband first and tie a knot in it so it is attached prior to being glued. Throw a little glue on the outside of the paper there that holds the bookmarks in place. I pre-bent this so that it has the curve to fit around the book already. Press it into place so that the top of the pages is right where that leather bulges out. Then I'll tape it on there, let it dry in place. The glue does some to hold it on, but we're going to sew it on, which will be the bulk of the pressure to hold it on there, the bulk of the stick. But we do want it to stay in place while we sew. I did a little practice prior to doing this one on the book, because this is the first one I've actually done on a book of this homemade style. So I made sure that the pattern I was using with the stitching would work. I'll do a separate video on these. There are several different variations of how you can make them, and they really add a touch of class to the book. And if someone knows what they're looking for, they'll really notice when you have a homemade custom end band. So I went black one direction, green back the other direction. Just used a weaver's knot to connect the threads. And here's our result. I think it looks great with those bookmarks and the old pages. So now we'll do the same thing on the bottom. On the bottom I started with the green and then went with the black afterward. It doesn't really matter which one. All the holes in the leather, by the way, are pre-punched with the awl, because otherwise pushing a needle through there would be a lot of work and probably wouldn't work very well. Now that we have that done, we need to prepare the leather. Started out with a light brown And it looks all right. If I were to do it again, I think I'd have done the dark brown first. What I didn't realize with this leather is once the first layer of dye is on there, it seals up the surface of it a little bit and the next layers don't go on as well. So if you're working with the vegetable tanned leather, which I recommend, then you want to really choose your colors first. You'll have very little chance to do second chances and fixes later. There's some. I've had in my head the whole time that I was taking this book apart and putting it back together, the kind of front cover that I wanted on it. I have even a friend working on a 3D printout for it. I learned some software in order to do the 3D sculpting for it and the whole bit. It's just not working. It's too fine a design for the printer, never mind for the leather to fit in it. So we're going to try something a little bit different, see how it works. Similar to what I did on the King James book, the little green one, if you remember from the tour video. So I'll cut out a little frame. That'll be a nice inset. Couple of reasons for this. One, it looks nice. But two, when I put the letters on, you don't want all the pressure on the side of the book and all the friction and moving to be just on the tops of the letters. It'll wear through. Maybe not in 50 years, but in 100 years it'll wear through. If you've got the frame there, then the frame also takes friction. You've got a lot more surface area, and your letters will probably survive. Gives a lot more protection to the cover of the book, keeps it nicer longer. So I'll line that up. These covers are 4 layers thick. There was a lot of spine swelling with that many repairs, even though it's rounded. And a nice thick cover on a book this size works really well anyway. So we have plans for British India, for the East India Company. That's EIC. These little letters, I think I got them from Temu. They're very cheap, but they do the trick really well. This is just a printout of the crest for East India Company. Found it online, printed it out, glued it to some gray board, do some fancy cutting, glue it right on the front, and hopefully we'll be able to get a nice tight pattern from it. I'm a little concerned that the thickness of the leather will take the sharp lines of these letters and things and make them a bit too rounded, a bit too much like balloon letters. It's thinner leather than I'm usually used to working with, so it's possible it'll be all right, but we shall see. At this point in the build, my fingers are thoroughly crossed. Put a little protective layer on there. Build it up past the edge of that spine where it sticks out so that we're not crushing the spine. And we'll put the block gently on top and let it rest there for a while. Let that glue dry. So now we have a look. Nice and solid. And it's time to get the leather on there. Been looking forward to this stage for a lot longer than normal because this book took a lot to take it apart. Very thick book, lots of repairs, lots of drying time. And what I didn't expect was the difficulty of just holding the book while I'm working on repairs and sewing and things like that. A smaller book I can just prop up against that little orange weight that I use. This thing's way too big for that. Maybe if I had a stack of bricks or something, it might work. but the combination of its size and the flexibility of it made it quite tricky. It was fun though. It was fun to do. And I'm enjoying finally seeing it come together. It does have a really nice shape and feel to it already. It's nice to handle. So I glue the gray board and let it get tacky while I glue the leather. I like to glue the leather second so that it's still wet and it tends to be a bit stretchier. Some bookbinders will do layer after layer after layer of glue first, or paste usually first, so that the leather gets nice and wet with it. Some will even moisten the leather first. I found that's unnecessary for most of the things that I've done. Hopefully that holds true. This is really a satisfying part. Now you notice the brown of the leather, how much lighter it is than it was when I was painting it on there. It's really lightened a lot. Turned from milk chocolate almost into this buttery caramel. And it's the darker one that I'm hoping to go for. So using the bone folder, and then decided sometimes the best tools are attached to our arms. Just press through with my hands and get as much of that sorted and make it as precise as I can with my fingertips, and then I'll go in with the bone folders. Now you'll notice I'm pushing the leather inward toward the center from the outside. That's just a good way to get a little bit extra slack to allow for that dip down into the recess and then the rise up over the letters again. If we don't give it that extra little bit of leather, then it kind of pulls like a hammock from either side and lifts up out of the cracks and crevices. So at this stage, I think if I had left it this caramel color, then the front cover would have been fine. Wouldn't have been super interesting, but it would have been a nice clean look. But I want something a bit more dark and piratey. And I want the lettering and the crest at the front to stand out. At this stage, I quite like the color of the crest in the front. And had it stayed dark, spoiler alert, I would probably have been happy with it. That's not a bad look there. I like how the rest of it is coming out like a rough saddle. Something old and weathered. I like the idea that this was on the shelf of some ship captain's room. Have a little fantasy about the story that this book might have in its new form. So we need to do one more layer on that front cover. On the inside to just lift it up off the pages and let that leather sit where it's supposed to, and have the front cover meet the spine in kind of a level way. This one's going on the back, pardon me. So right now there's a bit of a ridge between the back cover and the spine. So like we did on the front with our little frame, we're going to raise it up a little bit on the back with the full sheet. And you want to make sure that the corners on these, especially the outside corners away from the spine, are really precisely lined up. You don't want overhang of the top layer or the middle layers, or you lose your nice clean edge. So a good layer of glue on the leather. Let it get tacky. In this case, I'm doing the leather first, and then a lot of glue on the spine. I don't mind if it squishes out a little bit. That won't hurt anything, and it makes sure to get it into all the cracks and crevices. With my brush, I'll make sure that I get in there so that I can pull it in tight to those false bands and make it stick well. Now here we have two little dots appear on the book. I don't know where that came from. I thought it was glue, and then it lightens up later. So I don't know, a bit of water maybe from the brush. I don't mind it on there, and in the end it's in a place that's not going to show. But even if it did show, I think it's part of the patina and mystique of the book. Now you'll notice that I'm pushing the leather away from the front cover that's already glued and dried toward the back, just making sure we've got a nice tight fit when the book is closed. When it opens, it'll have all the slack it needs, but we don't want any slack when it's closed. We want to make sure that the length of the letter is sufficient to go around the back cover as well to where we measured it. And in this case, it is. We got her just right. So this book with the covers on it is too big even for my big vise. So I'm just taking the extra time to go by hand and work it into the ridges on either side of these bands. Really satisfying activity, to be truthful, just to see this thing come together. And I waited to cut the corners. Big chunk of leather with lots going on, and I didn't want to risk a bit of miscalculation or a bit of change in the book causing the leather not to be long enough or not to be lined up properly with the cuts. You'll notice here too, I'm not cutting right on the measured line in most cases. I appear to be here on this one, but I'm leaving a little bit extra, and then I'm folding it up and adjusting afterwards. So I'm being generous and then pulling back, because if I'm not generous enough, there's very little a person can do about it. But if I have a little too much leather there, I can always trim a wee bit off. And now we're on to one of the most satisfying parts, folding over the top and bottom edges. This is the bottom, the tail of the book. And in this one, it's a tight fit between the spine board and that chunky tailband. But we'll get it in there. A little bit of persuasion and patience. I like the feeling of robustness, of sturdiness of this book. It really feels like it was put together to last, and it looks like a book that will last even in the conditions at sea or in a library or somewhere in a plantation. And that's what I was going for, something that's really meant to stand up to some punishment if necessary. It does, after all, contain the strategy for British India, as well as some history of the East India Company. I haven't read it through. I think it'd be quite an interesting read, though. So I'm continuing just to work this through. This leather around the spine is just around one layer of gray board, so it's quite thin, but because it's pushed up against the end bands, the end result still looks pretty good. It's the right thickness to go with those thick front and back covers. So here, the little extra trimming off the extra, making sure that that lines up well on both sides before gluing. And again, you see how I have to hold the book up with my left arm and hold it still while I paint with my right arm, and now I'm holding it up while I'm using my fingers to help squish the leather down and hold it. Got a clip to hold this corner in place and let the leather moist with the glue get used to being bent. Sometimes it just takes a little while to decide to behave. Clip the other end and make sure the corners are nice and solid. And then do the same thing on the back. This is the point at which I knew for sure that the shape of the book worked out the way that I wanted it to. I was worried that that concave bit in the pages might be too pronounced there, but I quite like it. Now the back's very plain. I don't want it too fancy, but I'm going to put in a nice square frame, rectangular frame, I suppose. Making sure that the angles are right angles. Little ruler slip there, but it was about 1 millimeter. It was easily corrected. Here is a little bit of leather that I'm using for a spine label to get the cover on the spine rather than work the leather of the book directly. They quite often would do the labels separately, glue them on, in order to have them flush to the edge of the book though and not have a big edge sticking out. We shave the edge, we scribe the edge of it down so that it feathers out to a very thin edge. My knife here is probably not quite sharp enough. I sharpened it right after this book. Should have done it right before, I think. It's doing the trick, it's just extra work. Go along and make sure the little feathery edge is nice and dark as well. That undyed leather is so bright it would show up against the book quite a bit. Now this little leather tool, doing some blind tooling, so there's no gold. Don't have to heat the implement, I just need to give it a good whack. I made sure the volume was low for that because it's a bit of a loud thing to have on the video. These little letters are not expensive. I think they were about £10, so about $12 American, 18 Canadian, something like that. They can't be heated, so they aren't great with gold. They can't be heated enough to really work well with gold. You want brass for that. But a little pound of the hammer, they can make quite nice little impressions on leather in the right conditions. With the exception, actually, of the letter N. This particular set, the letter N gives me trouble. Never seems to quite do what I want it to. Now here, with a little wire brush, I'm wrecking the nice shiny surface of the book, tearing it up a bit so that the glue has a really good rough surface area to purchase to. And I really like the look of that label. Nice and dark around the edges, a bit lighter in the middle. Just a hint of those fleur-de-lis type patterns on the outside. This particular font I think works really well for it as well. Down at the bottom here, I want something a little bit more rustic. So rather than stamp in the tiny letters, I'm going to put them in by hand. Notice I start at the middle. I don't start with the 1 and then the 7, and then the 9, and then the 3. I go with the 7 and the 9 first because it's easy to center things, easier to center things, and then work toward the outside. And I know I'm going to be putting another layer of dye, another coat of dye on this, so I can darken these letters up, which doesn't look the best right now. But once the dye goes on, it'll fade in a little bit, but still be very readable. Once that dries, I do like that dark color though, I have to say. It stayed on that label quite well. And here we have what would have been the end of the book, except for this cover. I don't really like how this cover turned out. But luckily, we have the power to do something about it. I cut away, pulled off that layer. I think I'm going to use some green and red leather on it. First, cut away a piece for an additional label on the spine. And then, to replace the piece I cut out with a green inset panel. It's quite a deep impression on the front now, having a layer of leather and the outer layer of a gray board sheet peeled away. So when we make sure this fits, we can throw some glue on there and sink it in. It should have quite a nice luxurious effect. But I want lots of glue. I want it to be quite moist so I can squish the leather into the corners and make sure it fits very well along the edges. I cut it accurately, but doesn't hurt to press it in and have a really nice tight seal around the edges. I use my bone folder again to edge it to the sides, make sure it's nice and flat. And then I go through and add some pattern to the edges again. A nice match to that label on the side. Sorry for the camera shake there, but it does require a good little wallop. So again, I want to start from the middle and about that far down. I'm not actually measuring for the center. I'm measuring distance from the top just to have something that looks good. Plans for British India and then a little outline of the subcontinent there. Get a nice dark line around it, similar to what I did when I was writing the year on the spine. It fills up the bottom of that cover nicely, gives it a bit of graphic interest instead of just the words. And here, tool it in so it's got a little ridge. It looks good. And to match it, we're going to make a little label. I want to do a red label as well. The original book has that nice red and green label work on it, and I think it's worth doing a little nod to what was there before. This red and green will be a nice way to do that. Now the first 3/4 of this book probably are the plans for British India. And then there's a little history in the back. So we're going to start by shaving down our little labels, making sure they fit. I think I'm going to get a scribing machine, a little tool that I can pull these things through. Get a very level, thin. It's like a planer or a leveler if you're in the UK for the wood shop tools. And similar to the front and the other label, I'll put a design around the outside of the red and the green. So this one, being the top one, will have plans. Then the brown label is the East India Company label. And the bottom one will say history. Make sure the punch is facing the right way up. And do the outer pattern. I'm not being super technical with the way I line these up. I want it to look a bit rustic. I want it to be obviously handmade. Not shabby, but not perfect. Not too precisely engineered. And again, working the letters from the middle outward. If you measure them, that's not such a big need, but I like to do it anyway. I'll scuff up above, and though I don't show it, below the label as well. Again, to get a really nice sticky surface once this glue is applied. On goes our plans. Make sure I'm looking straight down the book. Apply that nice and evenly, again looking at the middle letter, and then check either side to make sure it wraps around the right amount. I did dry fit them. I tested them first before I put the glue on as well. So I knew they were the right size and everything. It's just a matter of getting the right position. And we let it dry. I am really happy with this one. Give it a bit of darkness in these letters so they're easier to read from further back. And a beautiful specimen of an East India Company book, Reborn. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you soon. Happy bookbinding.